I'm Andrew Ziegler. I'm your host here at Dev Interrupted. And this week we're bringing Zach Lloyd of Warp on the show. And Zach, he was the principal engineer for Google Sheets and recently the interim CTO at Time Magazine before he created Warp, the agentic terminal. And Warp's goal was to reclaim the command line as the ultimate environment for developers. And I'm really excited to unpack everything in our interview with him. But first, we're bringing back our recent guest, Brooke Hartley-Moy of InFactory, as our news segment guest host this week. Brooke, welcome back. You've been in the hot seat before, and now you're here doing the news. Thanks for coming back on the show to hang out with us.
Of course, it was a delight the first time. Glad to get a round two in.
We're so happy for it too. And this week's news segment is really fun. I know you and I are going to have a blast talking about some of the stuff we have lined up. And today we're looking at teams versus individual OKRs and tech teams and what that looks like in a memo from ThoughtWorks, why liberal arts majors should rejoice, reflections on a career in tech from one of our favorite authors here at Dev Interrupted, and the fight for audience mindshare continues between AIs and publishers. We have the recent scoop, and we're going to talk about that more. So with that, let's jump right in with our first story about team OKRs. And this is a memo from Paolo Coroli of ThoughtWorks about OKRs as a whole, used to drive top-down initiatives from an executive team. And he really highlights the difference between those OKRs that are set purely in an executive top-down fashion versus OKRs that are set by the teams themselves. This is what distinguishes a high-performing team, according to his research and this memo from ThoughtWorks we're going to link. So it really comes down to top-down versus self-directed goals being a game changer for how folks actually aligning get their work done. And I want to use this opportunity to maybe ask you, Brooke, you're a founder, you experience all things around goal setting. What's your perspective on OKRs?
Yeah, it's interesting because I've seen it from both sides. Obviously, currently as a founder, doing it at a small company with a small team, but then also previously being at large companies like Google, which really in many ways sort of invented the OKR process when it comes to, high performing engineering and product teams. And I think what often gets misunderstood about OKRs is that they actually are intended to be largely a bottoms up process as far as the execution side. So you have strategy and priority set at a high level. And I think that's important. I think it's important in a small company and in a big company. The role of the executive and leadership team is to say, like, this is where the ship is going and to point everybody in that direction. How everybody gets there, though, completely needs to be bottoms up. The idea that you at a high level, seven like rungs of leadership away from somebody who's actually completing a particular project or completing some bit of work, that you're going to be able to have the level of understanding that you're going to need to make that efficient and effective is just ludicrous. And so I do think this gets confused a lot. And I think the other side of it is then now being on a small team where there's obviously very little distance between leadership and individuals. If you aren't involving the individuals on your team in the goal setting process, you are 100% going to slow everything down because they're just not going to have the clarity that they need as to, we think of OKRs around here on like almost a daily basis or like an hourly basis. So there needs to be kind of that ongoing communication at the team level, or you're not going to get anything done.
That's a great perspective. It's also really insightful for me as someone who has the more IC perspective of, fulfilling those OKRs. I know I myself always can strive harder and do better at those OKRs when I'm involved in setting them, because you can at the beginning set expectations and also be able to be ambitious in ways that maybe those above you don't know that they can dream that you can do. And so setting your own OKRs is a fun process. It's really great to kind of learn how you think about it as well. And in the next article we're going to tap into is one that I know that we're going to have a blast talking about just because of our backgrounds, and we can both fill in more color in that in a moment. But there's an article from Kristen Stoller about the age of AI and how it means some tech leaders are reconsidering the communications degree as maybe the ultimate killer, right, on an application versus the traditional STEM and computer science degrees. And all I can say to that is, liberal arts, rise up. That is definitely the anthem that I march to. Those who listen to Dev Interrupted are no stranger to the fact that I studied classics in college. I have a history degree background. I come from liberal arts, and I firmly believe in its power within traditionally, science-oriented fields like STEM. I think there's a lot of contributions that liberal arts majors can bring. There's a lot of folks that have been on our show who have also come from similar backgrounds and have been history oriented. But I wanted to, take a moment. Brooke, what do you think on this?
You're preaching to the choir. My background, I was a history major. My co-founder, Ken Kashenda, who honestly is one of the most impressive technologists I've ever worked with, was a history major. And I think up until now it was super undervalued. Certainly this feeling that if you weren't pursuing a STEM degree, that was either because you couldn't pack it in a STEM program, or you might not be as ambitious as somebody with sort of a STEM leaning. The idea was that get a computer science degree, guaranteed six-figure job if that's what you're looking for. It's completely flipped. I mean, now you're seeing articles come out about people with computer science degrees very much struggling on the job market. And in the age of AI, people that understand the human experience and have a way to think about problems in a uniquely humanist way are in a very coveted position, I think, not just in the job market, honestly, for kind of for society as a whole, but we won't go too far into that path. No, I do think this is liberal arts and soft skills are cool again. I don't know if they were ever actually cool, but they're certainly cool now.
Yeah, they're definitely cooler now. And this even harps back to a recent guest that we had, Matt Greenwood of Two Sigma. He commented, he himself, an amazing technologist with a storied career, really kind of made a big cloud happen, right? This is someone who's been working in financial sciences for 30 years as their CTO. And he, of course, also studied classics, has a history degree. We talked about that on Dev Interrupted. And he mentioned how his daughter was recently picking a degree to go into and study. And he, of course, his first instinct as the father was to push her into STEM, into computer science, into those fields. But then he realized when she wanted to follow his footsteps and study history that maybe that was the better path after all. So it really is opening the door on where these skills can go, because at the end of the day, it's all about communicating what you want now. And so those who can communicate that best are going to thrive.
I shouldn't let this take over the whole segment, but I mean, can you imagine? It used to be like the default question is if you say you're like an English or history or classic major, someone goes, "Well, what are you going to do with that?" And
What are you going to
now,
do with that?
now, yeah, yeah. Well, like what do you get? Like what job? How many philosophers do you see getting hired? And people could not conceptualize how to apply liberal arts to kind of the more traditional industries. And now, I mean, I think it would be a fair question to ask a computer science major, "What are you going to do with that?" So.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy how the tables have flipped here. I would love for our listeners. I know everyone has an opinion on this. I would also love to hear from our liberal arts members in the audience. Please make yourselves be known. Find us on LinkedIn, say hello. We love chatting and continuing the story. And if you are not from the liberal arts world, there are so many entryways into it as a STEM person. So definitely follow your passions around culture. So moving on to our next story, I want to double click on a really great and amazing reflective article from a guest we've had on Dev Interrupted quite a few times. Someone we love here, Charity Majors. We've covered her articles and her thoughts here on Dev Interrupted. Something that stood out to me that I loved is how she painted herself as this bomb thrower. She was born as a bomb thrower, a naturally rebellious person who then quietly found that the most radical and rebellious thing that she could do was to build and be an institutionalist and just build instead of performatively tearing things down. And I thought this is an incredible reflection for an engineering leader to have, one that I found myself really resonating with. And I'm not even a very rebellious person at heart, but the idea of finding that rebellious nature and building something I really identified with.
I agree. I think that, as someone who is definitely a rule follower at heart,
Hmm.
I appreciate people with that perspective and also appreciate sort of the nuance that she created there. I also love sort of her discussion of sort of timing and like how her career has been influenced by some degree of luck. I used to work for Slack, and one of our interview questions was always describe a time that you've been lucky, or that, describe something that you feel was given to you because of luck. And I think that is often a very good barometer of self-awareness, because
Yeah.
at the end of the day, luck always plays a role. And, there's the hard work and there's the skill, but it's good to recognize the times in which sometimes there are things outside of your control, both good and bad, that influence whether you're successful or not. And if you have that self-awareness, I think it really speaks to a sort of a high EQ about how the world operates.
I really love that. Asking someone in an interview, a time you've been lucky, that's a fantastic glimpse into self insight and into self awareness about, your own, how you go about the world. I'm definitely going to steal that. It's amazing.
Feel free, feel free. I don't own it, no patent or anything. So
Okay,
go
great. Well,
crazy.
Slack, if you're listening, we'd love to maybe talk about that in your hiring strategies. But moving on to our last story of the day, certainly not least, I want us to go back to a story we've been covering quite a bit on Dev Interrupted. We've been coining it as the AI search wars in some regards, because in its early days, this was between services like ChatGPT and Perplexity fighting against Google for dominance on search, right? Folks were going to those platforms and AI to use them like search. And now we're really feeling downstream effects of that. We've been talking a lot in the SEO world about how audience and visitor trends are going down for websites as folks get their answers directly from AI that's scraping these websites and summarizing their own kind of content that serves to folks. And really what this does is it cuts publishers out of the picture entirely. Publishers were always kind of held, at
Yeah.
knife point by Google, right? Like Google already controlled search, but now someone's holding Google at a knife point, right? They're like Perplexity is also coming in here and basically removing folks one step further from the sources of this material. So in the fight for this, there's a lot of things at play here. There was a recent thing that in Factory, I know you were quoted for, Brooke. Do you want to maybe dive us into what you were talking about in regards to this continued fight for revenue?
Yes, definitely. So the interesting thing that has been happening, as you pointed out, the shift has really gone from, Google, who has always held all the cards and all the power and has largely extracted that from the publishers, to now Google fighting for some of its dominance. I don't know if it's fighting for its life yet, but certainly its dominance from the AI parties. Now, those same companies who have been continuously sued and brought into legal dispute over how they are extracting content, how are they accessing publisher websites, how are they able to represent this content back to their users, have started creating revenue share type offerings as a way to appease and sort of keep the peace, if you will, with the publishers. So Perplexity being one of the most recent examples of this, who has started, a millions of dollars sort of program for revenue share with publishers. I think what is sort of the Infactory perspective and my perspective on that is that it's not wrong. It's a good step in the right direction. But some of the things that I think it leaves out, I think number one being that people really underestimate how much money and effort goes into actually producing content. We have sort of this mindset, this as a content creator, like we have sort of this mindset that sort of content is free and should be free in terms of how it appears on the open web. And so getting people to wrap their heads around the idea that like content itself has value and should be paid for accordingly is tough, because we've kind of bought into sort of the free internet world. But AI is sort of turning that on its head. I think the second is just the fact that none of these AI systems, Perplexity and similar sort of search type systems in particular, really can exist or provide user value without a healthy, strong publisher ecosystem where there is like clear monetization. And so if there are no incentives for the publishers to continue to produce high quality journalism, high quality content, then that's where you get into like the acidification of the internet and sort of a breakdown in quality. And it's all the more important with AI, which also relies on a certain amount of quality in its training set and other things. And then I think the last thing I'll say though is that like also representing the other side and thinking about folks who are looking to build new AI technologies, and seeing myself also as an AI optimist, there has to be a certain level of access, and over gatekeeping is probably not the answer either, particularly because the players it's most likely to hurt on either side, really. Like the players the most likely to hurt on the publisher side are the smaller players who don't get a seat at the table with the Perplexities and the Googles of the world.
Mhm.
New York Times will always be fine. It's more of the independent content creators and publishers that struggle. And then on the other side, it's the Anthropics and the OpenAIs and the Googles of the world are going to be able to pay for whatever data or content they need to make their AI systems work. They do have the money to do so, whether they feel that their market power gives them the ability to not, that's fine. But they also at that end, you have smaller model developers, you have, startups and small shop agent producers and other things who may be relying on this content as well. And what can they afford to do in terms of participating in this?
So what I'm hearing from you is that the payment model that was already kind of breaking down for how good content is created and consumed on the internet is breaking down even more. It's buckling under these new additions to a system that was never meant to really work this way.
Completely. Well, it's because it was not a very workable system to begin with. Like we've
Right.
kind of made a devil's bargain, and we're
Yeah.
kind of paying that back now that we have this whole new technology that has really laid bare how fragile the entire system was.
Yeah, this reminds me too of this kind of like pay to play activity and charging and throttling. There was a recent thing from Cloudflare that I read that we covered here on Dev Interrupted, kind of in the same vein about Cloudflare using HTTP protocols there's in order to block crawlers from websites where they're not allowed to access, but then going one step further and exposing this payment level portal, or like on an internet infrastructure level that allows owners of those domains to offer up a way to get paid for scraping, and then whitelisting those scrapers that come in, assuming that they have a working credit card and can pay for, almost like the credits of getting their content.
Right.
Is a really
Right.
interesting working model, one that's still, very passive for publishers, doesn't really put them in control. And obviously, as you could possibly imagine, about a week and a half later, we then covered a deep dive from Cloudflare about how Perplexity had written a bot that got around their pay per crawl thing and was doing it anyways, and they did a full deep dive on that. So it's like they're going to always out engineer each other on either side. I'm really interesting to see kind of like where this falls and what the future of the internet looks like, because from your perspective, and I agree, the inshitification is upon us.
Completely. And I think that this is all like the work that Cloudflare is doing. It's a good step, but it's ultimately a stopgap. It doesn't resolve sort of it's fixing the symptom, not the underlying issue. And
That's right.
our whole viewpoint in Factory is like, how do you give the publishers and the data owners ways to monetize that don't rely on scraping and crawling? Because that system is a bit of a house of cards.
Yeah. Well, this has been an amazing deep dive into how you've been thinking some of the things in the news. We've had a lot of fun having you here and covering some of the latest. And thank you so much for giving us the deep dive on Factory's perspective on the publisher ownership of content. I'm really, interested to follow more, and we'll be including links for people to read the announcement in our newsletter as well. And for those of you listening, stay tuned, because after the break, we're going to be sitting down with Zach of Warp. Today, we're joined by Zach Lloyd, the co-founder of Warp, a groundbreaking startup that's reimagining the command line terminal. And we've been seeing disruption everywhere in developer tooling, mainly with IDEs being heavily disrupted. Gone are the days of the browser wars, and here are the days of the IDE wars. And you have all of these competitions between, VS Code and Windsurf and Cursor. But did you know that the terminal itself is just as ripe for disruption? That's what Zach's team is shipping for the developers of the future. So Zach, thanks for being here today to talk about what you're building.
Yeah, excited to join you. Thanks for having me.
We're excited to dig in. Our listeners are really keen to understand how software development in general is just being transformed and changed, and what they can do to take advantage of it. So let's learn about the terminal of tomorrow. I got some questions for you. I myself am in our previous conversations, you became fully aware that I'm like a terminal nerd. So I'm like really excited to chat about this today. Because the terminal is something that has been like a staple for developers for decades. We kind of just take it for granted. It's like a screwdriver. Why would you reinvent the screwdriver, right? You just have it on your tool belt or in your box. But it's an old school tool that kind of can be sometimes difficult to learn and use. Figuring out the commands that you can actually do on a terminal requires, previous generations of developers going to places like Stack Overflow or asking cryptic questions or piecing together articles that you can find online. But now we're in a whole new world where developers expect answers at their fingertips, right where they're working, wherever they are. And so, Zach, what inspired you to tackle this challenge and work on the terminal as a new tool?
Yeah, so I've been a developer a long time. I've always used the terminal, but not like loved using the terminal. And I've always worked with folks who were really good at using it and seeing that if you get good at using the command line, it can be just like a huge boost to what you can get done as a developer. That said, just to segue for a second, I actually don't think the terminal is the future, or nor do I
Mhm.
think the IDE is the future. Like Warp, just to be really clear, it just like did grow out of. It started as a terminal. The vision was like, let's make a more usable, more accessible terminal where you have to waste less time, like looking stuff up on Stack Overflow, like you said. But I actually think that in the future, developers are not going to be using terminals or IDEs so much. What they're going to be using is a platform that's all geared around doing like agentic workflows. And at Warp, the goal is to build that at this point. Like we've started with the terminal as like the form factor, whereas like Cursor and Windsurf, VS Code, as you've mentioned, they've all started with the code editor as the form factor for using AI to improve developer workflows. We've started with the terminal as the form factor, which I think in a lot of ways is actually the more natural form factor, because when you think about what you're doing as a developer using the terminal, you're basically, it's an interface for telling your computer to do things. And so in the old school world, that's like you type a command and that runs a program, and that program might run for a long time, it might not. In the new version of the world, rather than typing a command to run a program, what you do is you type a prompt to launch an agent. And so that's where I think the world is going. But you're right, we started as a terminal, which is like I think a pretty unique entry point into the like new world of how things are about to start working with AI.
What you're describing is really spot on in terms of like there's a future tool we're all
Yes,
working towards, but we have to start with the tools that we recognize and understand and know how to use, and maybe feel around in the dark or take those baby steps and figure out where these tools can go. And in your case, you started by looking at the terminal, like
yep,
the classic REPL interaction with your actual computer base, and
exactly.
instead of the IDE. And I'm wondering, like, when you went in there and you started tackling this problem, there's a whole slew of like of traditional problems around terminals that developers face. Did you go in trying to solve those problems, or just using it more as like a canvas to create the next generation of tool? Kind of
Well,
curious how you looked at it.
it's changed a bunch. So we're 5 years in. When
Yeah.
we started before LLMs, and the um the problems that we were trying to solve at the outset were really things around like there it was like it's a hard tool to use. And so just to give some examples, like the mouse doesn't work in the terminal. It's like, well, why are you using a tool this was in 2020 where it's like you can't use the mouse. And I understand some developers don't want to use the mouse, and that's totally legit. You may be faster not using the mouse, but at the very least, it should work. And there was another class of problems around, I would say, like discoverability. So, the terminal is like infinitely flexible and powerful if you can remember what the flags and arguments are for various commands. And we're like, why are people wasting time trying to memorize all that stuff? So we're like, how do we fix that problem? So at the beginning, it was really just like, what would be a better, more accessible user experience? Something that kind of lowers the barrier of entry into the terminal, because it is a tool where a lot of developers have their first experience doing something, and it's not a very positive experience. It's like you're trying to set something up in Python and you hit some missing environment variable and you're like, what the heck is going on? And so
Right.
we were trying to lower the barrier, but we were also trying to make it so that for pro developers who actually were comfortable in the terminal, they could get more out of it. That's where we started. As LLMs came out, we realized pretty quickly that this is like a very, very good fit technology for the problem set that we were working on. And so we did the thing that I think a lot of companies did in like 2023 when ChatGPT came out. Like we put like a chat panel into the terminal, uh,
Yeah.
which is
Classic.
like, a very fast bolt-on surface level solution. And then we pretty quickly realized, hey, there's actually like a way deeper integration that would make more sense here. in that the terminal interaction itself is already kind of a chat interaction. So having like a chat panel on the side of the terminal didn't make as much sense to us. It's just like, let's just let people interact with the terminal via natural language. And so that was the next thing that we ended up launching in 2024. And then the sort of use cases that you could do with that have really evolved. So at the beginning, it was like kind of like what you alluded to in the intro. It was like a lot of people would use it to be like, how do I do X? So they would use it as like a question and answer type interaction pattern. Be like, how do I undo my last Git commit? Or how do I like get out of this crazy detached Git state? Or how do I like rebuild my Docker containers? But what's happened is that the paradigm has shifted from the how do I, like the question and answer, to something that's much more imperative. Where as a developer today using Warp, you just say what you actually want the computer to do, and it does it. So you just say like, undo my last Git commit, or like fix this detached head state. And then what's happening is that the models and the amount of context that you can feed into them, the models have gotten way better, the context has gone up. And so the complexity of task that you can just sort of prompt your way to doing, it keeps going up the complexity ladder. And so you can now like prompt it to build features for you, to investigate production problems. And it's just proven to be a very natural interface for doing that type of like, you prompt the computer to do something type work. So that's kind of where we're at today.
It's interesting how you describe it, how it evolves from the interrogative, asking questions, to the imperative and making commands. And we've seen this evolution in how folks interact with AI and use it with tooling. And kind of what you're arriving at sounds so similar to me to what we would consider as to like a coding agent that
Yes,
lives in your terminal.
that's what it is today.
Yeah, so like what you describe, it's like it makes me think of, you might use like Amazon Q CLI, right? Or you might use Claude Code or Goose, right? And you would use it in the terminal. But in this case, the terminal itself is the agentic tool. Then
Yeah.
that is what you built. And so as part of that, do you find yourself, are those competing tools, or are they like a better together type of use case?
They started off as sort of better together. Today, it's really competing. Like Claude Code, Aider, Goose, all of these terminal-based coding agents, they are like I would describe them as like doing a subset of what Warp can do.
Okay.
And I think Warp is actually the better interface to do what you do with those tools. The advantage that Warp has compared to something like Claude Code, which is a very cool tool, is that Claude Code is running as a CLI app. So
Mm.
it's something you boot up your terminal, you run Claude, and then you're inside of a REPL inside of your terminal. And the downside of that is kind of like the downside that Warp itself is trying to address 5 years ago, where if you're running an app inside of a terminal, you're really limited in terms of what you can do with the user experience. So you can only render characters. The mouse doesn't work again, which is annoying. You lose the ability to do any kind of richer UI. So like in Warp, for instance, when we present a diff to the user, they can edit the diff using their mouse and like WYSIWYG tools. Whereas when Claude Code presents a diff, it's like an immutable thing that is just like printed to the screen. Claude Code, you can like run multiple of them, but because you're running them as like multiple terminal apps, you don't get like any kind of like layer of management for them at the actual
Right.
app layer. So like for Warp, for instance, it's like we let you have like a nice like panel that shows all of your running agents. We give you system notifications when agents need your attention. And so just by moving up one layer in the stack to be the actual like platform as opposed to an app running in the platform, we can offer a much better, richer experience than one of those other apps. And like for instance, like another great example of this is, so when you run an arbitrary REPL within Warp, so say you're running like the Node REPL or like the Postgres REPL, Warp can give you AI inside of those running apps
Mm.
by virtue of the fact that we are the terminal, whereas like something like Claude Code or Goose or whatever, they don't have any access to the platform layers. It's like the difference between like being iOS and being an iOS app. So I do think we're at like a way more powerful uh, layer in the stack. And so, yeah, we are essentially competing with those tools, I think, with a better experience at this point.
Yeah, it's cool how you're right that it's like it's the tool itself, so you get all the context baked in through all of the layers. Everyone knows when you use a terminal, it's like it becomes Inception. You're like application and an application and an application, but like we're
Yeah,
talking
this
about
is
the core of it, you know?
it's kind of like there's a lot of people who really love using tmux. I don't know if you
I
know.
use Tmux. Yeah, I use
So
Tmux.
tmux drives me crazy because I'm like, it's like, why are we like emulating a terminal within the terminal as opposed to just building the features
I
that you
want
might like?
panes. I want split windows and panes, Zach.
Yeah, and like we just have that natively at like the app level. But
Well, see, then
they're
that's just an improved terminal experience, right? Because
yeah,
I would not use Tmux if it was built into the terminal I was using.
yes. And so in warp
Yeah.
it is, but people still like there are I don't want to be totally dismissive. Like there's cool stuff that tmux does that warp doesn't currently do. And likewise, there are some advantages to just being a pure CLI app. I don't want to be dismissive of those tools either. Like you can run those tools like on CI or something. Like you don't need
Yeah.
the UI. And so there's use cases where I think they're better, but for the most part, if what your workflow is as a developer today is like, hey, you want to come in, open up your tool and start multitasking with agents to fix bugs, to build features, to investigate production. I think it's way better to do it at the layer of like the outer app, not at like an app running
Not
within the terminal.
not nesting it inside of the
Yeah.
Tmux and splitting it all up and getting all of your henchmen doing your stuff completely.
Yeah.
It's like, and what you're describing actually is such a critical part of building the terminal, I think, which is why it's so fascinating how you're tackling the problem because terminal is one of those things where folks get really opinionated
Oh
about
yeah.
how their terminal can and should work. Like
Oh yeah.
I'm like a dot files disciple. I have like the
Yeah.
repo that I manage, right? I have my tmux config. Like I have my opinions for how all of these things work. And so like when I'm going to use a new tool, I want it to play nicely with those things. But at the same time, I want to take advantage of new opportunities. I'm willing to throw away some of that personalization I've scraped on top of maybe I've personalized it to make the tool that wasn't user-friendly, more user-friendly for me. But if a more user-friendly tool comes along, then that's an opportunity for me as a developer to try something new, which is like what you're building.
You have an amazing attitude. Like I think that's an awesome way of looking at it. Like there are
Do you
very
encounter the opposite from
I
folks with the
I
terminal?
I do. Like on
Yeah.
Hacker News, there are people who think that warp is like akin to like a sacrilegious thing because it breaks some of the assumptions that people have historically made between terminals and shells and dot files and just like how that whole ecosystem uh, has traditionally worked. And that if you are a like terminal power user who has spent a lot of time building muscle memory or configuring that, and then you come into warp and it doesn't work the way you expect, I think it's very understandable that you would be frustrated with that. On the
Yeah.
flip side, my my feeling is that setting all of that stuff up asks the user to do an awful lot of work and puts a very, very high barrier to entry in terms of getting like a good terminal user experience to the
Yeah.
point where I think it really like turns a lot of people off of using the command line at all. And so, and this is the camp that I was in, and I'm not I'm a pretty experienced developer. Like I was a principal engineer at Google. I built a lot of the Google Sheets product and like, but I'm of the development mindset where I'm like a little bit lazier and I'm just like, I want things that just work. I want
Yeah.
defaults that are sensible. I want UX patterns that are familiar to me. And I think a lot of the world is like that. And I always felt like there was kind of a sort of vocal minority of power users who like the existing thing that made it harder to innovate and improve the base experience for the rest of developers. And so, I that's what we've tried to do. But it definitely has like irritated some people who are maybe more traditionalists, and that's okay.
Well, it's like there's a lot of opportunity to customize the stuff, but I think what people have
Yeah.
to remember is that we customize it ultimately because it doesn't quite hit what we need. We need all these extra things, so we do take the time as a developer to go in and sprinkle
Yeah.
them in, and then you end up like, well, if I'm sprinkling them in, and I'm the only one who's using this, I'm going to make it perfectly tailored for me, and then this is where you get that like staunchly entrenched
Yeah.
configure, dot files configured developer. But I'm definitely of the mindset where it's like trying out new tooling and new ways of using these tools is what we all need to do right now, is what we talk about every week on Dev
Everyone
Interrupted.
should be doing that. Yeah.
Everyone should be. And so it's like a huge opportunity.
And like a lot of it's a huge opportunity. I agree with that completely. And a lot of the kind of older ways of working that were very like tuned, they were just tuned for a world that existed before AI. And I also think there's a lot of developers who are kind of tired of hearing about AI. But just to give an example, it's like you
Yeah.
may have like some crazy list of aliases that you've set up around doing like complicated Git things. You may have like very complex like completions set up again for like you want your tab complete to all this stuff. All that makes it's just like less necessary and less useful in a world where you can just express your intent directly in English to do a task, and the AI will help do it for you. And there will be some people who like lament the loss of like, oh, but I used to know like the 50 different
Yes.
flags. But I like think of the space it opens up in your brain and in your day to do what I would imagine is like more fun, more cool, like deeper problem solving. And
Yeah.
like to the extent it moves you up a layer of abstraction and frees your mind from having to deal with that minutia, to me that's just so much better and even more fun as a developer. And it's not about like replacing like it's like getting rid of the kind of work that I like don't like doing as a developer. Like, oh man, I have these merge conflicts. That's not a good use of my brain power. A good use of my brain power is like, let me think how the product should work. Let me think how the system should be architected. I think like you have to at least try these new tools and try them with an open mind, like what you were saying.
Absolutely. And this kind of gets now at the core of our discussion, I think, about where this is all going and how the roles of developers will evolve, because we are all moving up the cognitive food chain, so to speak.
Yep.
And what we're doing and what we focus on in our day-to-day jobs is much broader, and it's more decision management. It's about understanding the product and the impact of what we're building, building for the customer, the end user, as opposed to like you just alluded to, kind of getting lost in this like sea of all the minutia of trying to execute those obscure Git commands or figure out, all of these things that you typically have memorized or aliased to do your job, when you can ultimately express those needs with natural language. So when we're stepping into this new world, I'm curious to know, where do you see this going for a developer as somebody who orchestrates agents, and how is Warp building for that?
Yeah, so that's what our entire product is oriented around right now, is what I think the new workflow is going to be. I think the new workflow, if you're a developer, is you're gonna you're gonna have a bunch of stuff to build. You're gonna have a bunch of stuff to fix. That's not gonna change. But the way that you use the tools to build and to fix and to improve your systems and to ship product is going to change to one where it's like you're one higher level of abstraction as you do your work. And so your typical day might be like, hey, you're going to come in, you're going to open up, let's just say you're going to open up Warp for now, because that's the product that I'm working on. You're gonna um, you're gonna have like things you want to accomplish. So you might want to build a feature. And so you're gonna start by sort of telling your computer, hey, I want to build this feature. Here is the context. Here are the designs. I don't think right now you are typically going to like one shot it. Right. And I think this is like a fear that a lot of developers have, is that it's going to be just like type a prompt, walk away. Like I'm using these tools daily to do my normal development work, and like they can one shot simple things. I think the complexity of the things that they will be able to one shot is going to go up, but really you're still going to have to be like, let me work with let me think about how to decompose this problem. let me think about how to check in on the progress to make sure that, if I'm going to delegate pieces of it to an AI, it's not going too far down the wrong path. But you're going to eventually get to a point where you start to kick something off, and it could be like, hey, go up to point X and then check back in with me, or check back in with me if you hit some error that you can't resolve. You're going to start that task, and then you're going to move on to your next task. And that task today as an agent task might run for like 1 to 10 minutes. In a year from now, I think one of the axes that you're going to measure the progress of this stuff on is like how long it runs for. It might run for 10 minutes to 30 minutes. It might start running for an hour. But you're going to start another task, and you're going to go through that same process of like, let me work with an agent to decompose this task in a way that makes sense. Let me understand what the agent is proposing. And so I think this is one of the other failure modes as I work more and more closely with these tools like Warp or Cloud Code or Cursor. I've worked with them all. Like a real failure mode, if you're a real developer using these tools, is like set them free, and you come back and there's like 1,000 lines of code written, and you're like, I don't understand why it did this.
Yeah.
We could never check this in. Like maybe it kind of works, but it's like this was a waste of time. And so these tools are going to have to become really good at explaining their thought process to you and making sure that you as a developer are not just like doing dumb stuff. Like, there's a very high risk of shipping bugs or shipping security issues. And so the like explanation and comprehension piece of it, I think, is really important. But you're going to be working closely with these agents, almost like they were like, I don't like to anthropomorphize it too much, but kind of like they're like teammates a little bit. And you're going to have multiple of them going. And the net effect to you as a developer is that it's going to be a multiplier of what you're able to get done. It truly will be. It's going to make you do harder work, I really think, in the sense of like, you're going to have to use your brain to do the stuff that the agent is not good at doing right now, which is like good abstractions, good system design, good performance, making sure code goes into the right place. But you're going to let the agent write a lot of your code. Like you're not going to be typing code very much, I don't think. You're not going to be typing commands very much. You're going to be thinking more and like guiding more in English. And so I think that's the workflow that's coming. And so then as someone who's building tools in this space, what we are trying to do is build the right set of tooling to support that workflow. And I don't, like I said it earlier in this conversation, I don't think that tooling exists. I don't think it's the IDE. I don't think it's the terminal. I don't really think it's something like Devin or like these things that are like autonomously running around your code base. Not today, at least. Maybe those work for very simple tasks. But because you need the developer's brain in this deeper way, I think it's the tool that like best allows the developer to do kind of the hard thinking and the orchestration to get the results they want.
Yeah, you're touching on the skills too that developers will need to embody to be better developers. And we've heard this from a lot of folks on Dev Interrupted. Dr. Ashori from IBM, who talked about the new skills that developers will need to have, and really it focused around you will become a decision manager more than an action doer, which really aligns with what you're talking about in terms of setting these agents off to do their tasks. And you're not really writing the code, you're understanding the abstractions and the end result of what you're building, right? So it's like a new skill set, really. It's really can be night and day from some of the skill sets that traditional engineers or engineers until now have been building. Are there other skills in that toolbox that you think are really critical for folks to start building as they start kind of moving up the food chain?
There's the foundational stuff that you get when you study computer science or you study math or basically study anything with like rigorous reasoning. I think like problem solving is your number one skill still as a developer. It's just like where in the stack are you doing that? Like back in the day, you were doing it with assembler. And then along came like C, and then came C++, and then came Java, and then Python, and then JavaScript. And like the distance from the metal increased, but the fundamental like skills of like logic and problem solving and just like reasoning through tasks, that's a constant thing. And I don't see any world where that goes away. And if anything, that's like more and more important. Can you see the big picture? Can you see how pieces fit together? So that's like big picture. Way more tactically, I think like you're gonna have to learn how to use this new tool set. And that's like, again, I don't want to overemphasize that because I don't think like a developer is like defined by how well they can like use their IDE or their terminal or something. But there is an actual skill set in how do you prompt, how do you decompose problems in a way that the models are good at doing bite-sized pieces of them. This is all like totally new territory,
Yeah.
where it's like there's no real best practices. No one is learning how to do this, but kind of I would imagine that similar to like taking like a high level programming class, at some point you're going to take a high level class or course on like how to effectively work with AI to build systems. And so, a lot of people miss that. I think like a lot of good engineers will have their first experience with AI be something like they hit some issue and they're like, okay, I want you to fix this thing for me. And like they'll literally prompt it like that. And like that's not going to get the job done any more than like, like you have to explain in a lot of detail what it is that you want done in order for it to do it. It can't read your mind. It's not like magic. And having that kind of bad experience, I think, has led people to believe that the technology is useless or it's like it's not there yet. And like there's some truth to that. Even I think if you tried, working closely with AI 6 months ago, you would find that like, hey, it's not quite ready. But the rate of progress is like so fast that having one bad experience like that is like you have to get past it. You have to learn how to use the new tools, and you have to kind of do like a continuous education thing because the power of the tools is changing very fast.
What you're touching on is so true that folks who use these kinds of tools maybe like 6 months ago and didn't have a great experience, never revisited them, their mindset about what they can and can't do is fundamentally just it's an era behind, it's a decade behind
Yes,
in terms of how far
it's crazy. The rate
it's
of progress is
crazy.
remarkable.
The
Yeah.
rate of progress is remarkable, and then the need for continuous education is just profound. Like it's just like you need to be a voracious learner to be a developer now. And what advice would you give to one of those folks who maybe tried one of those tools and have a good experience, and they're just like, maybe they're a skeptic now, or they don't know exactly how to get started. What would you say to get them back into the mix and trying out a tool like Warp?
Yeah, so first off, it would just be like an open-mindedness, I think is really important. Approach it like a tool. So like I think that a thing that turns a lot of developers off to this stuff is it's overhyped. It's like you see all of these Twitter demos of it doing stuff and they're like, yeah, right. And so view it as a tool is my first thing. And what does it mean to view it as a tool? It means that there's like some responsibility of the user of a tool to learn how to use it well. So it's like, you wouldn't like open up Vim and be like, well, maybe you would. Like I would open up Vim and be like, what the heck is this? But like,
What is
but
this?
like,
How do I exit? How do I close this thing?
or Git or whatever. It's like there's a learning curve, and so
Yeah.
approach it from the standpoint of like, hey, I'm gonna try this. I'm gonna need to learn how to use it. I would say realize that it's a kind of weird tool in that it's like got like a sort of stochastic quality or like a random quality to it. It's
Yeah.
unlike any other tool that you use that's like purely deterministic, whereas AI is just not. Fundamentally, there's like I mean, it is fundamentally a function, I guess, but like you have to use it as though there's like an element of randomness to it, which is kind of a foreign experience for most developers.
Yeah.
I would recommend like seeing if there are people on your team who are using it successfully and like learning how they're using it and having them share prompts that they're having success with, share tasks, share how they like what their workflow is. There is a lot of good content online on this. Like I even I'll plug I do a live stream where I try to use AI to do real coding problems, not um like one shot marketing websites, which I think is like a lot of like
What
what
you
people
see
have
the
seen. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and so I think seeing that type of development where it's like, I'll be like, okay, I'm going to go one step here. I'm going to have it write tests. I'm going to verify that the API looks good. Then I'm going to go to the next step. And so showing how you can use it to break down a problem, that would be my advice. And then yeah, just like recognize that the stuff is changing super duper quickly. And so, you may have tried it and it's it's really much better now and will
I,
probably be much better 6 months from now.
Yeah, exactly. And I love too that you learn in the open, that you have a live stream where you kind of hack around with these tools. People can get a glimpse of your thought process. I think, which I think is most critical, almost like the body doubling of I'm gonna
Yeah,
watch another developer use this tool, like, and
totally.
it's gonna critically fail for this guy, and then
No,
like, what
and
does he
it,
do to
it,
fix it?
and it
You
fails for me
know,
all the time, and
all the
that's
time. Yeah.
that's okay. Like at the end of the day, I still think it's like a net gain when used properly.
As we start to kind of wrap up our conversation, we've covered a lot of ground about what you've been disrupting, what you've been building, the skill set of developers of tomorrow. I'm wondering, from your perspective, are there any kind of like top level points that you'd want to end on if talking about like how developers will orchestrate with agents of tomorrow? Perhaps there's something that you see about the future of development that you think a lot of your peers are missing or are maybe not quite on your level in terms of understanding where it's going to go. Any kind of points like that that you'd like to end it on?
I think one big point that is maybe overlooked is like this is a real change in behavior that we're asking developers to make. I think there's a lot of like thought of like, okay, you put these capabilities out there, you do demos online, uh, that developers will just overnight change the way that they work. Most developers are not working with agents right now. The extent
Right.
of most developers' use of AI right now is autocomplete, which is a great feature, but I think it's fundamentally going to become obsolete as developers move to a way of working where they're not doing so much stuff by hand. They're not editing or coding by hand. And so, from a product standpoint, what I think is really interesting to explore is like, how do you meet developers where they currently are in their current workflows? So, whether it's in the terminal or the IDE, and like get them without beating them over the head, like, you need to work with AI, you need to prompt, but get them to want to do it and get them to have that experience of like an aha moment that this is actually fun, that this is
Yeah.
actually like a cool new way of solving problems, that this isn't like a thing that's competitive with me. Because I feel like there's a lot of like, this is going to take my job, this is going to like replace me. I have just the opposite experience at this point, which is like, this is super fun. This is like I'm playing a game of like trying to get this like alien brain to like help me do my work. And it's like a great puzzle to solve, which is like one of the things that I love about coding to begin with and development to begin with is that puzzle solving nature. And so, I'm just trying to think for Warp. This is a thing that's very top of mind for us of like, how do we get developers to have that experience of like, this doesn't suck. This is actually fun. This lets me get more done. This lets me focus on like stuff that I want to do and get them to experience that as opposed to be told that they need to start working in that way. So I think whoever's going to be really successful in this new like product space is going to be a product that like gets really good at that, because that changing developers' behavior is really hard, and I know that
Really
from
hard.
being in this space for a while now. And the best way to change their behavior is to just like give them the experience of the new thing and then have them want to change it. So that's my last thought.
Amazing. Well, that's really well said, Zach. And, we've covered a lot of ground here about how Warp is evolving to meet those new needs of the developer, and kind of re envisioning the whole developer experience. And I can't think of a better note to end on than to say that, you have to get folks excited about where this is going, and you have to
Yep.
build that internal momentum, not by saying this is how it must be, but seeing this is how it can be, and
Exactly.
showing
Yeah.
showing a better world. And I think that you said that really well. And for folks that are curious about like what we talked about today, where can they go to learn more about Warp and what you're building?
Just go to warp.dev. You can download it. It's totally free to get started. You can watch videos on it. You can check out our YouTube channel if you want to like see us doing interesting stuff and learn more about the product before you try it. But yeah, that's it.
Amazing. Well, then we'll drop those links in the show notes so folks can check it out. And to you, if you've been listening, this conversation is one part of a long saga conversation we've been having on Dev Interrupted about how the developer experience is evolving, how people are using new tools to get more work done. So if this is something that is really interesting to you, that you're working on your teams, Zach and I want to hear about it. So come on LinkedIn and tag us about today's episode. We're posting this episode on Substack and LinkedIn. It's really easy to give us a notification and let us know what your team is doing that was successful or unsuccessful, or what your own personal experiences were around using these kinds of tools. Because when we're all having conversations about it, we can all get better informed about where it's going. So thanks for joining us for this conversation, and we'll see you next time on Dev Interrupted.
Thanks for having me. This was awesome.